The sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the grand corporate building as janitor Elijah Carter adjusted his cap and pulled his cleaning cart closer. The pristine marble floors reflected the dazzling city skyline through the towering glass windows. Late nights in the office were nothing new to him, but tonight was different. A group of sharply dressed executives strode past him without a glance. He had grown used to their indifference. To them, he was invisible, just another worker in the background. Elijah didn't mind. He preferred silence over the hushed whispers and mocking smirks that often followed him when they did acknowledge his presence. Except for tonight. Tonight they laughed. Man, can you imagine? A janitor thinking he belongs here. One of them chuckled, nudging his colleague. What does he do? Take notes while scrubbing toilets, another joked. Elijah tightened his grip on the mop handle, inhaling slowly to keep his expression neutral. He had learned long ago that dignity wasn't about what others thought. It was about knowing who you were. Still, their laughter followed him, lingering in the air like an unwanted scent. He glanced at the elevator, the one that led to the upper floors, to the place where real power was held. For years, he had watched those doors open and close, carrying people with polished shoes and expensive suits to offices where decisions that shaped the company were made. He had cleaned those offices. He had listened, and he had learned. Tonight, however, Elijah wouldn't just be cleaning an office. Tonight, he was walking into one, not with a mop, but with a key. And when those executives saw him sitting behind the desk that once belonged to their CEO, Elijah Carter had always been a man of quiet resilience. Born and raised in a small, struggling neighborhood, he learned early that life didn't hand out favors. His mother, a woman of unshakable faith and determination, had worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. His father had left when he was young, leaving behind little more than faded memories and unanswered questions. From a young age, Elijah understood the value of hard work. School had been his sanctuary, a place where he could lose himself in books and numbers, where he could dream beyond the cracked sidewalks of his childhood. But dreams didn't always pay the bills. College was a luxury he couldn't afford, and so he took whatever jobs he could find. Construction, warehouses, delivery services, until finally, he became a janitor at Grayson and Holt Enterprises. At first, it was just a job, a paycheck, a way to survive. But soon, Elijah began to notice things, patterns, conversations, discarded documents that told stories of mergers, investments, and strategies. Each night, as he cleaned the executive offices, he read reports left on desks, absorbed financial charts, and listened carefully when employees spoke as if he wasn't there. It started as curiosity. Then it became something more, a secret education. While others saw him as just a janitor, Elijah was quietly building knowledge. Every night, he took notes, mental blueprints of how businesses were run, how power was wielded, and how decisions were made. He studied on his own, using the public library to read books on economics, leadership, and corporate strategy. Then came the real breakthrough. One evening, he overheard a late-night conversation between 2 senior executives discussing an upcoming stock opportunity, one that could triple investments overnight. It was risky, but Elijah had done his research. He knew it would pay off. He scraped together every last dollar he had and invested, and it worked. That single investment turned into another, and another. Over the years, Elijah built a small empire in silence, growing his wealth behind the scenes while still pushing his mop and emptying trash bins. Then, an opportunity he never expected presented itself. Grayson and Holt Enterprises was on the verge of a major shift. The CEO, Leonard Grayson, was stepping down. A new investor was coming in, someone buying a controlling share of the company. What no one knew was that the investor was Elijah. Now, as he rode the elevator up to the top floor, no longer dressed in a janitor's uniform but in a sharp, tailored suit, he prepared for the moment he had waited for his entire life. Tonight, the board would meet the new CEO, and the men who had laughed at him, they were about to find out exactly who he was. The elevator chimed softly as the doors slid open to the executive floor. Elijah stepped out, his polished shoes clicking against the marble tiles. He had walked these halls 1,000 times before, but never like this. never with purpose, never with power. The boardroom was at the end of the corridor, its glass walls allowing a perfect view of the city skyline behind it. Inside, the men who had once dismissed him were seated around the long mahogany table, laughing, chatting, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. As he approached, the murmurs outside the room died down. A secretary who had never once acknowledged him now looked up in confusion, eyes widening as she took in his suit, the confidence in his stride. "Elijah," she whispered, almost in disbelief. He smiled slightly. "Mr. Carter." Pushing open the doors, he stepped inside. The laughter inside the boardroom stopped instantly. Heads turned, eyes narrowed in confusion. Leonard Grayson, the outgoing CEO, was the first to speak. "Elijah, what are you doing here?" Elijah took a deep breath, savoring the moment. Then, with steady hands, he placed the ownership documents on the table. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice calm but commanding, "let's get started. We have a company to run." For the first time, the room was silent, and for the first time, they listened. Elijah had expected resistance. He had anticipated skepticism. But what he faced in the coming weeks was nothing short of war. The executives who had laughed at him now saw him as a threat. They questioned his leadership, challenged his decisions, and did everything they could to undermine his authority. Board meetings were filled with pointed remarks and dismissive glances. Some tried to sabotage deals, hoping he would fail. But Elijah was prepared. Every move he made was calculated. Every decision was backed by knowledge he had spent years acquiring. When they attempted to block his first major initiative, he countered with data, strategy, and a quiet confidence that left them with no room to argue. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Employees who once ignored him now watched with curiosity, some with admiration. The company's performance improved. The stock value rose. And one by one, those who had doubted him found themselves outmaneuvered. But his biggest challenge was yet to come. A hidden enemy was waiting in the shadows, someone who would stop at nothing to see him fall. Just as Elijah begins to cement his place as CEO, he uncovers a shocking truth. His sudden rise to power was not unnoticed. A secret deal had been made behind the scenes, one that involved his greatest enemy. Leonard Grayson, the former CEO, had never truly stepped down. Instead, he had orchestrated a silent war, allowing Elijah to take control while setting up a devastating scandal to take him down. The executives who once mocked Elijah were not just fighting back out of pride. They were part of Grayson's plan to manipulate him into making a fatal mistake. With the press suddenly leaking damaging reports about Elijah's past and investors pulling out, he finds himself cornered. The question now is, was all of this just another test? Or had Elijah underestimated the very game he thought he had mastered? Let me know if you want more intensity, betrayals, or a completely different twist. The battle was over. Elijah had fought for his place at the table, endured every challenge, and emerged victorious. The company had transformed under his leadership, becoming more innovative, more inclusive, and more profitable than ever. But true success wasn't about revenge. It was about impact. Elijah extended opportunities to those who had been overlooked, just as he once was. He implemented programs to mentor young talent, proving that potential was not defined by titles or backgrounds. One evening, as he looked out over the city from his office, he heard familiar footsteps. Leonard Grayson stood in the doorway, no longer the powerful CEO, but a man humbled by the turn of fate. "You proved us all wrong," Leonard admitted. Elijah smiled. "No, I just proved what was always true. You just never bothered to see it." And with that, he turned back to the skyline, knowing his journey was only beginning.